Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omer. Now, 6 more separatist fighters have been killed in a gun battle with Indian security forces in the disputed region of Kashmir, taking the death toll for the year to the highest in nearly a decade. Now, as the death toll rises and more civilians die in collateral damage, we are trying to understand here on Newswire when this conflict is going to come to an end and how does the civilian death toll is brought down. We are joined by our esteemed guests today. I would like to welcome a journalist right now based in Jammu and Kashmir, Ms. Naeema Majur Ahmed. And also, I would like to welcome Anuradha Bhasin, the editor of Kashmir Times. Thank you so much. How do you see the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir right now? And can you elaborate a little on the ground situation, if it's gotten worse, especially in the past weeks as we see the death tolls rise?
Yeah, it's very grim and gloomy situation. Every day we see 7 to 8 people killing, whether in encounters, whether fighting on civilians, or crackdown, search operation, frisking and all that. That's going on for a long time now. And since 3-4 years, it has become more worse. And there's a lot of anger at the ground. And people, they don't care now. They have become fearless and they go to these army camps and tell them, yes, if you have to shoot us all at one time. You don't need to shoot every day. You can do it. And that's what has happened today. The people have plans to go to this cantonment area and tell them that you have to shoot us all. But there is a curfew-like situation in Srinagar at the moment, and nobody is allowed to any free movement or go anywhere. There's curtailment on the internet services at all, and this is the situation from the ground.
Are children able to go to school? What is the daily life like right now? If you were to give us a snapshot of the picture of any civilian, what is it like right now?
Well, it's a very bad situation because you don't know if you leave home, you're going to come back safely. That's the situation. And every parent, they are very concerned about their kids who are going to school. And most of the time our schools remain closed, and because there is this shutdown calls after every clean. And then somewhere, if you are caught in crossfiring and that, you get caught in the crossfiring, and that's another thing. And then this boy coming from Indonesia, marrying there and coming to home, and you see, he is being killed there. So, everybody is a constant fear, and it's been created. I think it's a constant fear psychosis state is there to keep people asking for what they demand. That's the situation at the ground.
We're trying to understand the situation on the ground right now. The number of people being killed, militants and civilians alike, continues to rise, making this year one of the worst in a decade. Trying to understand what the situation on the ground and how life in Kashmir has changed drastically. Could you give us an idea?
In many ways, the life is much the same. There's absolute despair on the ground. There are, the windows of hope are gradually shutting down of any change, of any kind of political resolution, of any kind of scale down in the human rights violation situation. The hopes are just dashing to the ground as the Indian security agencies continue with their policy of using bullets and pellets in a big way against civilians, not just against militants, during encounters against civilians in street protests, or even when civilians are just passing by or living, safely tucked away in their own homes during crackdowns and raids through oppressive system of detentions and illegal detentions and torture and so on and so forth. And there's very little that the youth can hope for a better future, for a collective future, for their own individual lives in such a scenario.
And Ms. Naima, let me ask you this. There has been a lot of international outcry. UNHCR has repeatedly come out with different reports, and a major one in June 2018, earlier this year, declaring that the systemic torture of civilians was of a gross magnitude. And then also from the Indian side, Indian forces have said we'll phase out pellet guns, but nothing has changed on the ground. How do you see this situation, if any improvements seen so far after the human rights report?
No, it has. I think it has gone worse after that because India didn't consider this very important report, or it could have changed its policy on the ground, but it didn't. And the policy of repression and suppression is going on, and the killings of civilians is going on. There's no let-up. There's no change.
Do you think that maybe the UN's role has failed in bringing a resolution here or resolving the conflict in this area?
I mean, I think UN seems to be taking a very, passive role in this context. I don't think, they have to see the ground situation at the moment. They have to send some observers there and get the situation there on hand. But it's not happening. And making some statements or issuing some statements or some pressures, it doesn't make any sense, and nothing is going on. And then they have to put pressure on the Indian government at least to stop these human rights violations.
Right, but the Indian government has continuously rejected this report, calling it slanderous, calling it propaganda. Why is that? Do they completely deny? On what basis?
I mean, we have to ask this to Indian government, why they are demanding and why they are killing every day then. If there are counters, if they have to kill militants, who are the militants? They are our boys. They are, demanding something which Indian government is not listening. That's the problem. And then I think the international community needs to put a lot of pressure on Indian government to see what is the situation going on the ground and send observers and get a on-spot report so that there might be some change. Otherwise, I don't think this seems a dead end.
Also, you were heading the Jammu and Kashmir State Commission back in 2016, and you were right in the thick of it when trying to resolve issues, especially when it came to harassment from police forces. Can you talk a little about the kind of roadblocks you came across in resolving these issues or the kind of cooperation you met?
Yeah, there is no cooperation from the departments, particularly from the police and other security agencies. There were some cases of this intimidation, harassment or molestation of some girls. But, everything comes within the ambit of law and order situation, and then whatever you want to send them, get investigation done, it just goes to deaf ears, so nobody cares about that because when you see everything with the prism of this law and order situation, how do you expect them to cooperate with you? But still, we tried our best to give little relief to the women, and I had 7,000 cases there. Not all these harassment or molestation, but there were some other violence as well, for violence at home or harassment at workplace also. We tried, but I'm sorry, I couldn't do much because of the pressure, because of the pulls and pressures from this side or that side. So that's why what is happening with the women. That's why women are at this time, more than 65% women are suffering from mental illnesses, especially depression, and there is no care. There are no psychiatrists. Nobody is doing any survey for that, so that we could have a little bit of relief arranged for them. This is happening at the moment, and the women at this time is suffering a lot because she is losing son, she is losing husband, she is losing father, and she is at the brink of all this turmoil.
When you were there heading this commission, did you interact or see any progress in having international human aid workers providing psychological care to these victims, to the mothers of these victims or the wives?
I tried to get involved, particularly first the state government, which has done nothing for the last 3 decades. And then the Indian government, I tried to get in contact with them so that at least they can look at this the women's side and the perspective of women, how they are suffering. But when you are not getting, because the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, you can't just directly contact the international community and then ask them to come and see and help us. You have to go through the channel, and that's why I have to resign after 3 years.
Let me
I have
ask
to
you,
leave
Miss Anuradha, let me ask you about what the international community has been doing for at least the women or the children who are victims of collateral damage. There was a report coming out, made a lot of news splash in the international community of one of the youngest victims of pellet guns. Now, pellet guns have constantly been shunned, and even spokespersons from the Indian security forces there have said they'll phase it out. Do you see any change at all in the choice of arms being used by security forces on protesters?
Change, I mean, since 2016, it is just deteriorating by the day. The way their choice of arms for dealing with the civilian population, or the scale of their atrocities. And in comparison to that, I do not see much international concern viewing the scale of devastation and torture and abuse and excesses. In view of that, I think the international voices are much more feeble. There was a time when there was absolute silence about human rights violations in Kashmir in the last 1 decade. These voices have just now picked up. It was for the first time that the UN came out with a report, and thereafter, Amnesty International has been coming out with repeated reports, or the international media, if you see New York Times and Washington Post, etc.
What about the Indian media? How does the Indian media, how do Indian journalists cover what happens from a humanitarian side in terms of collateral damage to civilians, to women, to children? How much of this is highlighted on a daily basis of what's happening in Kashmir?
On a daily basis within Kashmir, of course, yes, these issues are being highlighted. But in the Indian national media, much of the human rights violations is being dwarfed or even justified in the name of national interests, in the name of security interests, by invoking a kind of discourse that equates every Kashmiri civilian to a terrorist. And this is extremely problematic, because when you use Kashmir as a yardstick of ultra-nationalism or a national interest, all kinds of debate about whether the conduct of the Indian government, whether the conduct of its agencies is legitimate, in accordance with the international humanitarian laws, or even in accordance with the democratic principles of the Indian Constitution, which provides for, which puts on a huge, on a top level pedestal the civil liberties of the people.
Okay.
So these kind of questions are completely stonewalled because of such kind of a discourse.
I want to come back to talk a little more about the hardline policies that are adopted by the international government. But before that, let me just introduce our third guest here. It's Ms. Meshal Malik, the wife of freedom fighter Yasin Malik. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
There are news reports coming in about his arrest as the protest was headed towards Badami Bagh. Could you elaborate a little about what has happened right now?
Yes, it's very dangerous, and it's very painful that, the call was that, kill us all today. And they're wearing these coffins, and my sister-in-laws were all on the roads. There were all these women, children. Because, the wave of violence from the Indian occupation forces, it's gone to sky high. And I don't know, this is like the 21st century.
If you were to narrow it down to, a lot of experts are saying this is an unprecedented turn of events of how people are coming out on the streets. What would you narrow it down to? What has changed in the past year and a half that has caused such an uprising?
So the cost of freedom has risen, definitely. The human beings who died, who got killed, assassinated by the Indian occupation forces, they're never going to come back. The pain, the mourning, the melancholic atmosphere over there. There are mothers, they're doing poetry on their dead sons, on they're blinded. There's an epidemic. Has the biggest mass blinding in the history of mankind that's taking place right now on defenseless, unarmed people. And the violence is increasing from the Indian state. I don't know what they want. I mean, Kashmiri people, majority of them are peaceful. They're coming out for their legitimate legal right to self-determination, and they are being, attacked with shooter guns, with all kinds of weapons. And this is something which is really, really alarming. And the world should wake up that, reports have come out. The UN report has come out, and the British Parliament report. But it's not. But unless and until there's no pressure on India to stop this violence on innocent people, I don't think. The last thing I see is that them wiping out our entire population.
And when was the last time you were in touch with your husband? Were you part of these protests today?
I was in contact with him 3 days back when he got released, and he went to the hospital for his test because already he's kept in shabby conditions and his health is really weak. His kidney stones have enlarged and his metallic valve it's not functioning properly. The doctors advised him complete rest, so he'd gone for his test. And that's when he heard about the Pulwama incident, and he went into hiding right away, and the doctors were warning that his cholesterol level is very high. But he's a risk taker. He can't bear what these people are going through. And I was not in touch with him, actually, when he was in hiding. I was really worried about him. Where is he? There were search operations going on against him as if he's some terrorist. He's peacefully, politically fighting for legitimate right, which is recognized by the world. I mean, you talked about civil liberties before, and, even...
But Ms. Malik, this is a reality that is not new, where protesters know very well what is waiting on the other side. Could you help us understand, despite the kind of atrocities, torture, the kind of attacks that they face, knowing when they step out of their houses to protest, what kind of a mix do you see in the crowds? Do you see more participation from the youth?
Youth and children, little children and babies coming with their moms. They have feeders in their mouth. And every kid is out there because they're not safe in their homes. They're not safe in schools. They're not safe in the markets. They get pelleted. You heard about the story about Hiba, this little baby girl, how she lost one of her eyes. She's still going through those surgeries. I mean, they're trying to terrorize the public, the people, that, whosoever comes out and asks for their right to freedom or condemns the brutal killings or goes attends the funerals, they will be attacked by the army, and even they're not even sparing dead bodies. Now they're dragging them on the road. Sometimes they're human shields, and thousands missing. So many. I mean, this is going on, but the sentiment.
What do you think is the solution? What do you think is the solution right now?
The solution is that the world must put pressure on India to demilitarize, shun these black laws, draconian laws which give complete immunity. Unless and until that does not happen, these black laws...
More pressure on India from the international community.
That's the way the pressure
Thank you so much, Ms. Meshal. I'm sorry, this is all the time we have. Now I have to quickly get to you, Ms. Anuradha. I was asking you, you heard what Ms. Meshal said. It is really alarming, the kind of mix of protesters that are coming out, considering they know what the end is going to look like, that they will be hailed down with pellet guns, with firearms. But we see a lot of babies out on the street also. Analysts are saying these are the hardline policies of the Hindu nationalist government. Is that the case? Is he trying to win favor before the next elections?
Kashmir has always been used for electoral strategies not only in Jammu and Kashmir but in rest of the country. And especially this particular government, which is a right-wing government, and wants to enlarge its constituency on the basis of its hatred for minorities, for its Pakistan bashing, for taking a hard line on Kashmir. I think Kashmir serves that interest for them, at least that's what they think. And for that reason, we feel that there is very little hope till 2019 elections are over, because this government is not really, has not shown any signs. In fact, in the last 5 years.
You, Ms. Naima, do you feel that maybe Modi's government Kashmir policy has failed?
I'm saying that there is no policy on Kashmir by Modi government. Their policy is only to keep pressure on youth, on women, on children, so that they are being repressed, suppressed, because this type of their policy is giving them more votes, and they expect that in 2019 elections, the more you suppress Kashmiris, the more human rights violations will be there, whether it is Kashmir or the minorities, the more votes you get. That's the situation. That is why there is no policy for the last 4-5 years since Modi is there.
And maybe is that why also the international communities, any kind of pressure on India has also not made a difference?
That's what's happening. That is why we assume that this is happening. The international community is not taking any strong stance against this policy. Had it been, international committee, had they have taken the strong stand, I wouldn't think there would have been any civilian killings every day, which we are witnessing these days. That's why, I'm trying to say that,
very quickly,
there should be this. The lot of international pressure on the Modi government.
Lots of international pressure on India to make any difference. Ms. Anuradha, very quickly, your closing remark on what is the solution?
Look, the solution, the way forward is dialogue. And dialogue at two levels, one with Pakistan, one with the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and of course the third component is the intra-J&K dialogue. And these are the basic imperatives. Right now, Pakistan has, Pakistan Prime Minister has offered for a dialogue with India. I think India should reciprocate in whichever way. And if in view of the coming elections, there is very less likelihood of India responding to that kind of a gesture.
Okay.
I think Pakistan needs to show much more magnanimity and not get tempted into pushing for more militancy and return of the 90s.
Okay, I'm sorry, this is all the time we have, Ms. Anuradha and Ms. Naima. Thank you so much for participating here on Newswire talking about Kashmir. Now we're going to take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. Now, Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has been reinstated by President Sirisena. Now, the man who sacked him 2 months ago, causing the island nation to really spin into political turmoil. Now, in October, President Sirisena had replaced Wickremesinghe with former President Rajapaksa on a no-confidence motion. Now, the reinstatement has come after the Sri Lankan Supreme Court ruled on Thursday that Sirisena's firing of the Prime Minister was a violation of the Constitution. Now, what does this mean for the Sri Lankan government, and especially gaining the confidence back of the majority of the House? Let us talk to our esteemed guest right now. On the line, we have Dr. Nadeel, Executive Director of Verite Research, a think tank and a law expert. Let me start with you. Welcome to the show. Now, President Rajapaksa was known in his tenure for nepotism, for silencing critics and borrowing billions from China. Like, he wasn't seen very favorably. Why was he a choice for President Sirisena?
Ayza, just to go back to the story you constructed, there wasn't a no confidence motion against Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe this time. There was a no confidence motion that was attempted in the May of this year, which was defeated in Parliament. So really the actions of the president came quite suddenly and unexpectedly, without any no confidence motion, to remove the Prime Minister from his office and appoint a new Prime Minister. So I think the question has two parts to it. Why did he choose to act against Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe at this time? And how come it was his old nemesis, Mahinda Rajapaksa, that he installed as Prime Minister?
Right.
I think, let me try and give you a short reply, and we can come back to more questions later. The local government elections that were held in Sri Lanka in February this year gave Mahinda Rajapaksa, the ex-president, who's also in parliament, the highest number of votes. Almost 40% of the votes was gotten by a new party that he formed. And I think as the future presidential and general elections were getting closer and closer, it became clearer that he is the favorite to succeed for government in a future election, or that was the thinking. The president himself was looking at a way to extend his term as president and to run for another year, even though he came to the presidency, as have many presidents before, on the promise that he'd be a one-term president and he will abolish the executive presidency. He also began to have ambitions for a longer term in political office. So I think at that point, finding a partnership with his nemesis, Mahinda Rajapaksa, was for the current president perhaps the best way to secure a future political future for himself, and that might explain both of these things that happened.
No, but what I'm trying to understand is when he decided to fire Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, I mean, that in itself is a question whether that's constitutionally possible. That debate has also been going on. But what I'm trying to understand is what was the basis? He said that he could not deliver, he didn't have any confidence. What was, in your point of view, what was the reasoning behind this?
So I don't think he had a legal basis for removing Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. But I think he had a political reason to do so, because the UMP government, which is in power currently, cannot afford the current president a political future. So he had to pick a party within parliament that could actually support him for another presidential run. And it is only Mahinda Rajapaksa's party that can do so. But Mahinda Rajapaksa's party is not going to do that without him having done something for them first. And so this move of giving the prime ministership to Mahinda Rajapaksa was really him extending to Mahinda Rajapaksa something that was politically important for Mahinda Rajapaksa, who perhaps even wanted, according to his own statements, wanted a general election before a presidential election. And he wasn't going to be able to move that question in parliament without first being prime minister.
So now what does this mean for Sirisena in the future?
So I think both Sirisena and Mahinda Rajapaksa have had a very severe political setback. The country is very much going to be back status quo that it had prior to October 26th. And the last 2 months, almost 2 months of political uncertainty, turmoil, seem like a waste. During which time Ranil Wickremesinghe's popularity and standing has in fact increased rather than decreased. And both the president and Mahinda Rajapaksa have come out weakened as political figures.
Exactly. Experts are saying this is a moment where democracy has shone through and makes President Sirisena look really bad in this light of what he was going to do supporting Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Yes, because I think there's both a legal problem and a moral problem in what happened. The legal problem is that it does not appear that he had constitutional validity for what he did. Whether he can remove a prime minister or not remains in some legal debate. But certainly, after the newly appointed prime minister faced a no-confidence motion in parliament, there was no question that Mahinda Rajapaksa couldn't continue to function as prime minister, even though the president entertained him in that position. So there was some very strong legal problems and constitutional problems with what he did. The moral problem is also, I think, quite stark, because the current president's mandate on which he became president was based precisely on promising the country that he would reject Mahinda Rajapaksa's government, the corruption and the type of governance that Mahinda Rajapaksa had was rejected by the country, and that is the mandate that Sirisena inherited. So to take the mandate that had rejected Mahinda Rajapaksa and use it precisely to put Mahinda Rajapaksa back in office, I think was morally problematic as well. The president should really have considered, running for re-election as president on a new mandate if he wanted to do that in terms of the moral acceptability.
Now, the financial markets in Sri Lanka have taken a major hit, but after this reinstatement, we've seen some progress. However, analysts are concerned that having Wickremesinghe back and reinstated will not do much in terms of political progress. How do you see this analysis?
Well, I think the major hit in the financial markets has to do with the rating agencies that downgraded Sri Lanka. So Moody's downgraded Sri Lanka by 1 notch, and that caused everybody else to also follow suit and downgrade Sri Lanka by 1 notch, which makes borrowing internationally a little more expensive than it has been before, and reducing borrowing costs is a huge priority for the country. And I think Sri Lanka has to work hard to recover international confidence in order to get its ratings improved, because almost 50% of Sri Lanka's international debt is to international financial markets and on international sovereign bonds. So that is a very significant problem. However, I think the rest of the issues that Sri Lanka faced in terms of some capital flight, in terms of foreign reserves, tourists not turning up in Sri Lanka, that consequence is there, but there is potential to recover that confidence, especially for tourism. And the markets also, I think, in terms of confidence, should recover, even though a little bit more slowly. I think the challenge for the UMP is to demonstrate that it can govern in a way that is stable, that is rational, and also that the UMP can reform itself and build more hope about their own ability to govern. The reason the president, I think, felt he could carry out this particular move at this point in time is also because the UMP and Ranil Wickremesinghe were becoming less popular in the country with each passing month, because what they were delivering in terms of outcomes were not matching the promises that they had made at their elections.
They've also been very critical of relations with China, and especially when it comes to the port. How are things going to progress from here? What are the critics saying within Sri Lanka about Wickremesinghe's policies and relations with China?
I think there's a misunderstanding internationally about the Hambantota report specifically, and the criticism within the country about China. Sri Lankans aren't averse to China in the way that it is often portrayed, and Sri Lanka is generally averse to selling assets of the country to any external party, that is international party. And so there are laws to protect against the sale of assets, especially government assets, to internationals. That's why the Hambantota report finally was given on a 99-year lease. There was no outright sale, because outright sales are things that are resisted in the national psyche. And that doesn't matter whether it's sold to China or to the United States or to any other country.
But some analysts say that this lease was had to be given for 99 years to begin with, because it was a very unfeasible business project and more of a personal lucrative one for Rajapaksa, who approved it.
That's correct. I think the port had many phases in terms of business plan. Phase one, which came at about 25% of the cost, was actually quite feasible as a business idea, as a business proposition. But Rajapaksas went ahead with the next phase, which involved a lot of investment without a business plan to get an adequate return. So the only way to make the port successful commercially was to, in fact, add even more investment, which would require more borrowing that Sri Lanka didn't have the appetite to do at this stage. Mm-hmm. So I think that finding an investor, which was the challenge, it didn't have to be China, it could have been anyone, but finding an appropriate investor who was willing to come in with that extra capital to make the port commercially viable was important for Sri Lanka's economy. And I think it was a good thing that a partner was found. As I said before, just because the loan was taken from China, there was no requirement for Chinese to be the people who would be given that investment opportunity. It just so happened that China made the best offer on the table.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nishan, for being with us. Now I'd like to welcome our second guest, Mr. Amantha Pereira, a journalist based out of Colombo. Let me ask you this, Mr. Pereira, when the president's loyalists defended their stance, his stance that the constitution also says that the president shall appoint the prime minister, who in his opinion demands most confidence of parliament, how did he decide that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe didn't have the confidence of the parliament?
Well, I think it was mostly guesswork. And also a possibility that members from the other side would cross over. There wasn't any kind of other confirmation that was available for the country or for anybody else. So it was his word against what was happening in Parliament. And what happened in Parliament proved that efforts to get members to support the Mr. Rajapaksa as Prime Minister didn't bear fruit.
And also, in just trying to understand the legality of it and how it unfolded, can the president appoint a new prime minister, especially when there is no unity government?
Well, what we saw in the last 3 weeks here in Colombo is the fact that whether he can do that or not was tested. And what we saw was that, yes, he can do that, but if he cannot show, or the person that has been appointed as Prime Minister cannot show the majority in Parliament, it really leads up to nothing.
But would that be shown through a vote in the House?
Yes, it needs to be shown through a vote in the House.
So but did that happen?
It did happen, but it happened in the reverse. What happened was that when the Prime Minister was appointed, those who had the majority in Parliament said, no, we have the confidence, we have the support in Parliament, and they are the ones who showed majority in Parliament. So what we saw was the majority being shown in the reverse. So what in fact should have happened is that if you appoint a Prime Minister, then he or she should have gone to Parliament and shown the numbers.
And has, now that he has been reinstated, Prime Minister Vikram Singh announced any kind of change in policy for the remaining of his term?
Well, so far it's just 24 hours since he has been reappointed, and he has only addressed the nation twice, and he has just been very general about his plans. The cabinet has not yet been sworn in, so it's still not clear the nitty-gritty into what he's planning to do. But from what we've gathered from his loyalists and those who are close to him and his policymakers is the fact that they are most likely to present a vote on account just to make sure that the government doesn't run out of money. And then they would likely to go for the budget. But also Mr. Vikram Singh has told his party members, his MPs and others to be ready for elections. So we are likely to see elections within the next year, if not a little after that.
And what is the word on the street? How are the people of Sri Lanka reacting to the Supreme Court's decision?
I think the people are relieved. What the people felt and what the people expressed was the fact that this was a political battle that had nothing to do with them. The people didn't know about these things, and they didn't have a very real say in what was going on. So, and then they saw a lot of horse trading going on, and there was a lot of disappointment, there was a lot of disgruntlement and disappointment. And when this whole impasse was came to an end, I think the relief on the streets was palpable.
Now, there are a lot of analysts that are also saying that Vikram Singh's return is a part of a Western-backed conspiracy against Rajapaksa, who was getting too uncomfortably close, as they say, to China. How do you see that point of view?
Well, if you look at the closeness to China, Mr. Vikram Singh was not very far from China. We saw all the deals and all the agreements that were signed when Mr. Rajapaksa was the president, going through while Mr. Vikram Singh was the Prime Minister. So that argument that one was close to China and the other was not doesn't hold that much of water. But also these allegations of one being backed by the Western powers and the others being backed by China are mainly political slogans right now. We haven't seen that much of evidence. Obviously, ideologically, the politicians and their parties are aligned with certain ideologies. So that's true. But in terms of showing evidence to validate these allegations, we haven't seen anything at all.
And also the Tamil legislators, the Tamil National Alliance and smaller Muslim parties have always supported Vikram Singh during his tenure last. So do you feel like they are still standing behind him? How will this translate for him and also for President Sirisena in the upcoming early elections, as we are expecting?
Well, traditionally, what we've seen, at least in the last decade or so, is that the minority parties generally have supported Mr. Wickremesinghe and his UNP. And that has kind of been the tone that was set since the October 26th takeover of the Prime Minister post. So the support is likely to continue. I'm not really sure whether Mr. Sirisena and Mr. Wickremesinghe are going to go into an alliance in the future. So Mr. Sirisena would probably now join hands with Mr. Rajapaksa and contest against Mr. Wickremesinghe and his party. So if you look at the trend of parties supporting various other parties, the minority parties supporting Mr. Wickremesinghe has traditionally held.
Now, how will this work out for both of them, Mr. Rajapaksa especially, considering that he's always taken a very hard line on Tamil demands?
Well, Mr. Rajapaksa's support base is a very, very pro-nationalist support base. And that's what he appeals to. He appeals to moderates as well. So Mr. Rajapaksa will feel comfortable in the appeal he's making to the majority community and also the slogans that he's using. Whereas Mr. Wickremesinghe probably doesn't appeal that much to the extremist groups and the nationalist groups. So in that way, I think both will be comfortable with the slogans that they are planning to use and obviously are using right now.
And how is the economy faring now after these turn of events? The standoff has come to an end?
Well, it's again too early. What we've seen is that the stock market has kind of stabilized a little bit, but it's just 24 hours. And one of the main concerns for the new Wickremesinghe administration is to make sure that the rupee doesn't slide even further. So we will have to see in the next couple of weeks to the next few months to see how he tackles the economy. And also we're going into the year-end holiday. So there's likely to be a lull, most probably after the cabinet is sworn in tomorrow. There's likely to be a lull and the real action probably will start in the new year.
And what are the major challenges he's looking to take on now in January onwards?
I think the main challenge probably would be to make sure that the rupee doesn't slide, because the rupee depreciation is really felt across the board, and make sure that the prices are not going up. That will be one of his main concerns. And then I think thereafter, these are political parties. One of the biggest concerns for him would be how he maintains the goodwill that clearly was created in the last 3 weeks and take it to an election which is eventually going to come. Because before the October 26th before President Sirisena sacked him on October 26th, his government was not very popular, but that trend reversed in the last 3 weeks. So he would probably want the momentum to be on his side and to continue with it till the next elections, whereas Mr. Rajapaksa would probably look for a reversal of fortunes.
No, this is something that the President Sirisena had cited as a reason why he had removed or sacked Wickremesinghe in the first place, that the political turmoil in the country was something that he couldn't take on. What were the specific issues that he was referring to?
Well, during his speech yesterday, soon after he swore in Mr. Wickremesinghe, he detailed his grievances, and on top on them was the bond scandal, where there was a major scandal running into billions, and according to Mr. Sirisena, it could run into 1,000 billion rupees, connecting the sale of government bonds. That was one, and that the investigations into the scam did not go through properly. He also spoke about an allegation and a police investigation into an assassination plot against him, where he was targeted. He said the investigations into that also were not carried out properly.
But Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has constantly denied knowing of any such assassination attempts on President Sirisena.
Yes, But President Sirisena's grievance was that when he looked into the police investigation, he said that he didn't think that it was carried through properly.
So what does this hold for the future of President Sirisena and the kind of alliance he's maybe looking to make with Rajapaksa?
Well, I think he will probably now have to go back to what the Sri Lanka Freedom Party proper was, to gather whatever support he has, and then to come into some kind of an agreement, an alliance with Mr. Rajapaksa, and then go into elections as an alliance or as a group to counter groups that are supporting Mr. Wickremesinghe.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amanta Pereira, for joining us here on Newswire. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. We'll be seeing you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.